Hey everybody, you're watching Spark Survival. I promised you the other day that we would start talking about some stuff via distance learning, all things considered. So I thought now would be a good time to start talking on how to think about gear. What kind of stuff should you have if you're going to go out? You're going to be camping, you're going to be hiking, you're going to be out in the wilderness or far from home, and all those kind of things. What kind of stuff might you need should you get stuck someplace for any length of time? How do we think about survival gear? What things are worth buying? What things are worth thinking about? Um, I think the very beginning of that to start with is how to think in general as it applies to survival. So I try to put everything in our classes into as few a categories as possible, and we have a thing that we kind of call the 5 points of survival. What are some of the most crucial things that you are going to need in a survival situation? And those 5 things are going to be fire, water, shelter, food, and rescue. Um, Generally in that order, not necessarily. It depends on your specific circumstances. It pertains to your environment. So I think it goes without saying that some of our gear should have a lot to do with those things. Fire is going to be really important in most survival situations. You're bound to want to have to cook something at some point. You're going to possibly have to boil water. You might have to keep warm or just protect yourself from wildlife. So if that's the case, if that's really important, we're making that number one on our priority list tentatively. Um, you should definitely have some stuff in your gear to make that happen. So as it applies to the 5 points, I just want to kind of quickly go through a few things. This is my Alice pack. You might not have something this big when you're out in the woods. You might not keep something this large in the car on a regular basis. But for me, this kind of does everything that I want it to do. It's got plenty of room. Um, so within the 5 points, fire being really important, these are just a couple of little examples of things that you can do that are just very practical. I keep Ziploc bags, reused containers. This was some mints. There's some jute twine in this, staying nice and dry because I can take little bits of that, I can fray it, and it'll take a spark real easy. We can fill these with matches and things like that. These containers here are actually waterproof containers of waterproof matches. And bring a lighter, for crying out loud. I mean, there's no reason to pack a bunch of sticks to rub together out in the woods. There's sticks everywhere. So this should be your go-to. In an emergency situation, you're likely to go for this first. Go ahead, make your first fire, get comfortable, and then save this. Um, you're gonna want that quick, easy fire on the go. So I would go through your other ways of making fire first. Which, speaking of, I want to touch base on just products that are out here. I don't want to pick on anybody, so I'm not going to bother telling you where I got this, but this is the tag that came off of a ferricidium rod that I got off of Amazon. And it talks about building a fire on here, and it tells you to make a mound of tinder, take your striker to scrape the serrated edge down the ferro rod, creating sparks, and then apply fat wood. Well, you may or may not know what fat wood is, so kind of consolidating a little bit in terms of your information is really important. Don't fall for gimmicks. Just use what makes sense. Knowing's half the battle. I keep things like this. Try to use different containers. This was probably from some kind of science set I had laying around. Keeping things like this, and in a later show we're actually going to do this together, and we're going to make these little fire starters. It's simply just newspaper, it's some string, it is a strike anywhere match, and it's coated in some wax, making it burn longer and keeping it waterproof. Reusing containers is always a great idea. As Les Stroud once said, there's no such thing as garbage in a survival situation. Dryer lint, as silly as that sounds, that's it. As long as it's kept in a bag like this, it'll stay nice and dry. It takes the spark pretty well. It burns actually relatively slow. Just things like pieces of napkin, paper towel, these things could save your life, and it doesn't take up any space, okay? Another example of reusing containers. Most people don't know what those are anymore, but this was for film once upon a time, before the digital age. But keeping things like sewing materials in just a little bottle like that could be really, really helpful. Keeping fish hooks and line. What else we got in here? A little bit of first aid, some gauze, just anything like that that you might end up using while you're out. Always a good idea. This particular backpack, it's got a place for a canteen built on it, has a place for my compass. I'm always going to bring that because it's just a good idea. Shovel. As it applies to water in our 5 points, having something like this, these straws are reusable. You can literally drink out of a mud puddle with this bad boy, and you're going to have fresh water for quite a while. Keeping a nice bright orange rain gear in your bags, never a bad idea. So this is going to apply to both shelter from the elements, and this is really great in a rescue situation too, because it's really high vis. It's easier for other hikers or people trying to find you. This can be seen from an airplane if necessary. It's never a bad idea to think about just even a small flashlight. What if you need to go find more firewood while you're getting ready to go to bed? Just a really good example of how to reuse some things also. This is a little Galaxy phone box. Takes up very little space in your bag. Just makes really good sense. You can organize a whole bunch of different things in here. Our reusable matches that we made in a previous episode. Your ferricidium rod. All these things can go in one box. Lighter, I actually have multiple lighters in here. I keep multiple books of matches in here. Just a good way to keep all of your fire-related gear organized and in one place. It's never a bad idea. This is just a reusable bag. I've just threw some tinder in here. There's some birch bark. Takes the spark really easily. Just little pieces of wood that I split up. And this is going to be nice and dry. If you're stuck out in the woods and everything is wet, that's not a bad idea. It takes up very little space. Why not? It might seem silly, but it might be a great idea. Lastly, for this video, I just wanted to talk about equipment. We talked a little bit about knives. What was the one thing? If you can have about 3 of each tool that you're going to need, I highly recommend it. We talked about ferricidium rods, matches, lighters. At least 3 different ways to make a fire. 3 different tools. In my opinion, if you're able, we talked about bringing a pocket knife. This is the knife I carry generally. This is going to do all your fine work when you're out and about. This isn't going to do any workhorse type stuff. You're not going to be splitting firewood with this, but this is the knife that's going to stay sharp, and it's going to do those little things. Cutting cloth, cutting rope, just all the little jobs. Having a belt knife. Here's another example of a belt knife. This is actually, by the way, most guys that are in survival circles are going to try to make you think that you need to spend $200-300 on a Tops or an ESEE or some really expensive carbon steel knife. Those are great knives. I don't have a problem with them, but not everybody has $200 or $300 to spend on a knife. This thing was made in Taiwan. Okay, this was, I think, bought in a flea market when I was a kid. This thing has got hammer marks all over the back of it from where I batoned it through wood. I've made more kindling with this knife than you can shake a stick at, no pun intended. But that does not take the place of a hatchet or an axe. Guess what? An axe is the best tool to be an axe. So trying to replace it with a different tool, not really my cup of tea. I highly recommend keeping a good hatchet that's built well, that's gonna be there to do what it needs to do if you're in a survival situation. And nothing beats a saw. This particular saw is made by Silky. It is a Japanese company. In my opinion, best saw out there. This is about $75 investment. Maybe you don't want to spend that much on a saw that you may or may not use. This will cut through wood faster than any other saw on the market. I guarantee that. For 75 bucks, I think it's well worth it. So you got your small knife, you got your big knife, you've got your saw possibly. They make folding varieties that are really easy to put in a bag, or even just a day bag, smaller bag than this. Well worth it. So if you have any other questions, stuff, feel free to put in comments. If there's things that you've always wanted to learn, we would love to continue to make videos like this and just sort of work with you while we're still waiting to be able to go back to parks and all that kind of good stuff, so we can have actual groups and do kind of teaching in that environment. But that's just a couple things to think of about the 5 points, and we'll continue to do more on that and how to think about gear, and we'll test out equipment, and we'll kind of see what is good, what is worth it, what's worth spending my money on. So that concludes another class for today. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe.